the scope before I come to this decision. So that's where I received
Right.
that and made that comment. And that helped me to understand what their perspective was in writing that letter. And I went back and reflected on the video of when that was presented by a planning commissioner regarding their understanding of what that letter was. That's what I'm saying. We're just rambling.
I think this is a good conversation, personally.
May I make a comment, please?
Not at this time. We're
I would just like to
not at this time.
speak into a microphone.
We have not got to public comment yet. So when we get there, we hadn't got there. So, are we ready to continue?
We're having some YouTube difficulties. We have IT on it, but we are
Yeah.
recording via Zoom.
Onward to the fog.
Sure thing.
Okay, Ms. Swati.
So we can start with file OM70, which is a text amendment to the community design component. There was no text proposed previously for this component, only the goals, objectives, and policies. This time, when the Planning Commission updated the comprehensive plan, they decided to include the text for the community design component. As previously noted, this component was duly noticed in the newspapers, to the agencies, to the cities. And we did receive comments from City of Kootenai, Idaho Department of Fish and Game, and Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. All of those comments are included in your packets. There were some agencies that replied with no comment, and there were others that did not reply. We did not receive any comments on this component, on this particular component till February 9th, or even till yesterday. So this component has gone through multiple workshops and public hearings. Today being the second hearing with the Board of County Commissioners. Planning Commission did recommend approval with a vote of 6-0 on their November 15th hearing. And I can pull up the component that was proposed. The reason that this component is going through a second hearing is because the board decided to change the recommendation of the Planning Commission. That the reason behind that was that the Planning Commission decided that there was more changes needed to what they had recommended in their hearing. So they proposed a new draft, which was taken, which is being brought to the board in their second hearing now. Are there any questions that I can answer about this component?
So I've had some community feedback from District 2, and I will say District 2 is very focused on the kind of the federal global reach of things. And so the language of community design is already in existence in the European Union, where it's a way of dictating actual, like the building design, what a landscape should look like, how you plant. And so a lot of the questions that I received were, is that what this is intended for? Because that was one of the concerns, is that what we're kind of doing, that design, which comes out of also, the UN has that mention, as well as a couple of places in Africa. And one of the things is it's a focus of the county is saying what that design is, and then the second question that I was asked is that something that's more appropriate for the individual cities to decide what their design is, or how much is the county dictating what an area can look like? And is that what we're following, is that Europe's kind of view of community design? And that was a question on that.
That's correct. So community design is usually intended more for how the buildings should look or how the facades should look. We do have some of those standards in our commercial district building standards. For example, you have to have broken up the facade, or it cannot look like a straight blank wall. So there are some of those standards which are included in our ordinance currently. But since we don't have really urban areas in the county, this is previously discussed in the Planning Commission's meeting. Other than that, the previous version of this component had a lot of things that had to do with land use, so that was specifically taken out of it because this component is not about land use, it's about how the buildings should look, how close they should be, what the building heights could be.
And I think that explanation is in line with what the European Union is doing with community design. And one of the things that you're seeing is this idea that not just in the design, but for example, the number of solar panels and then preferences given if you're moving in that type of a direction versus maybe a different direction. And when you look at how you get funding in counties, that was the concern is this a way of government dictating more of what it looks like versus the landowners dictating. Some of this concept you see in like Leavenworth is a good example. They have a design because that is what their trade is, to look like Leavenworth. But is that idea appropriate for a county versus a smaller area? Because when you dig deeper into the European Union's view of this, they are taking this at a level that is very different than what we had in our comp plan in terms of how the facade of a building should look. It ties a lot into more of that globalist type of a view, and that was the concern that came from the district that I'm in on this particular topic. And I didn't have enough. There's actually a web, there's a seminar tonight regarding like the smart city kind of movement, and that's what I got asked questions of. Is that really what this is? And it's just kind of the...
That was not the intent of the Planning Commission to write this component to impose building restrictions or how the facades should look as it is in cities. That was not the intent of why this component was put into place. Yeah, there are certain things in our, like I said, there are certain things in our ordinance that does reflect this, which is very limited, very, very limited on how the lighting should be on commercial buildings, because that largely impacts, because the structures are so close to each other. It's not relevant to the rest of the county.
Well, but could it not be, for example, I've had conversations with some folks out there and they brought up stuff that I never considered, such as what restricts somebody from the middle of, let's say, the Hoodoo or Selly Valley from building a tower 400 feet tall with lights that project in every direction? What in our current design standards stops somebody from doing that?
It would be the services. If they can't get the services to do that, they probably can't go that high up.
But what if they could? Then they can? I mean, as we're looking at this, I don't personally think that a tall tower that's, let's say 100 feet, that's still pretty tall, that you're having light pollution or dark sky that can be impacted. And there's nothing saying no. And how we design things and where we put things matters. If we want to have rural zones, why would we not have some rural standards for what meets the rural zone? I think that's...
Commissioner, I think that has, the Planning Commission doesn't see it as a foreseeable problem where somebody is going to put up a tower, because if you don't have services, you certainly won't be able to do that, no matter how much. If your height restrictions really doesn't keep anything in check, it doesn't help anything.
Right, and I think on this one, it wasn't, the community input from my view, it wasn't that. So when you look at the terms in the design, it's an analysis of the needs of governing landscaping, building design, tree planting, signs, and suggested patterns and standards for community design. And it also says development and beautification. And so that is a lot of open to interpretation of who makes those decisions, how does that get implemented, who says what design. And so the question was not at a county level, what are we saying, the person who wants to put in a development, and if they put in solar panels on the top of their homes, that because part of the way the European Union works is you actually can jump in line on your application if you're going to do certain things that they have decided are part of the design, that feature that they want. And who is dictating that, and then couple that with the concern of on private property. That's where my questions came from. And I don't know the answers, it's just the dialogue of that's what was brought to me on this, and the example that you have could reasonably for Bonner County be seen as an extreme example of what is happening in Europe. But as we see our growth in this area, is that going to, does this language open up for us to have to follow someone else's design for private property? That was the question that I had, that I guess the board has to discuss or get input from community. That's just me bringing what came up and what I looked at on this particular topic, because it is actually defined very similarly to the way Europe is doing it. Any thoughts?
Yeah, for me, I understand growth, control growth and all that. City of Sandpoint has these, if you're gonna build this, you've gotta have so many corners in your building, you've gotta have this and that, and it's like, you know what, if you require all that, City of Sandpoint, then you pay the extra cost of all those corners. The building we want to build across the street, it's a government building. It doesn't need to be a design magazine star, 5-star thing. They've got 39 corners in a rectangle building. Every time you add a corner, you just throw a bunch of expense to the builder and the person buying that building. You can do a lot of things with design without requiring all those foolish corners. But that's where government is getting in and telling you where you can build and then how you have to build it. And I am totally 100% opposed of any government telling you how to design your building. Now, there are certain restrictions you're going to have to meet no matter what you build. It's going to have to fall within the guidelines, setbacks, all that. But that's your building. I don't think county government needs to be in that business. I find it restrictive, I find it intrusive, and it's overreach of powers as a private landowner myself. Now, me personally, I don't want to build something that's ugly. The fact that I'm standing there probably will add to the ugliness, but that has nothing to do with the building.
Commissioners, the planning commission chairman would like to.
So this one is just a generic compliance thing, or? Alan,
Yes, sir.
But are you closing and opening? for
are you
public
through
comment?
yet?
I think the planning commission is the applicant on this application.
No, okay.
So the
He's the commissioner.
But my presentation is kind of done.
Okay, Alan, go ahead.
Well, the state code requires that there be a community design component, which we didn't have in the existing comp plan. So it was important for us to make sure that the comp plan in its entirety is enforceable to address all the components,
Okay.
which is required. So we developed this component, and it's very general. It's not to say whatever restrictions there are on buildings or whatever in design is really up to you in terms of code, but that's not appropriate for a comprehensive plan component. And if you'll see in the component that we drafted, we rely heavily on the sub-area plans, and we make general statements about, you should take into consideration this and that, and reduce lighting, cluster development, rural rather than urban, with an emphasis on rural design. So if you look at what the component is, it just sets a framework out for possible considerations by the county commissioners in establishing code for future development. So that's all it does. It doesn't in any way dictate, nor should it, design standards or how much lighting you need or don't need. It doesn't say anything like that.
No.
It's just a very general statement of the need, as the code says, for possible design standards.
That's the answer I was looking for.
Commissioners, I would also like to add that the state code says that all of these components that they have listed in the state code they have to be addressed in the comprehensive plan. And if the commission chooses to not address them, then you have to state a reason as to why you're not including it. And but earlier we didn't have a text for the community design, and I don't believe I have been able to find as to why it was not addressed previously. We do have some reflection of this that translates into our ordinance, but we didn't have a text for it.
So we have to at
That
least
basically
mention
solves
it and
that.
address it to be up to code.
But that's true, but in the definition of this, the question comes of, it does say building design. And so then I would ask, how does that
Yeah.
get interpreted if you're
Well,
saying that? I mean,
that would
I understand, but that has a bigger implication.
Right.
Can I
That
bring
would-
up an example in our ordinance related to that?
Please. Could an example also be, you can have a main dwelling, and then an ADU is only 900 square feet. So that's a restriction on density and design.
Yeah, for example, we have here the design standards for commercial uses. Basically, I'll show you an example here. So if you look at this image, you see how dense the development is. This is where this is where you use these design standards which are related to community design. You need buffers, you need sidewalks, you need tree planting, you need landscape design standards, right? That's one of the examples in our ordinance. It's very limited, majorly to commercial areas or high density multifamily areas, but it's not used anywhere else in general.
So am I hearing you right, that you're saying this is applying to high-density areas? That
Commercial
that's-
uses. This
No,
part-
I mean, the idea of community design is where it would be mostly applied, is what?
Yes,
am I
cities,
understanding
mostly cities, and in Bonner County, it would be commercial zoned areas, which has, or industrial maybe.
And anything past that would come up in your building permit process for a certain area that's going to require whatever.
Not really. In our building permit process also, we don't have those for like R5 areas or suburban areas. It's not there. It's not applicable to those areas.
And I can accept under when we're talking about the commercial and that kind of business district type of a design. And I guess I would have to ask maybe Alan, how does that, or somebody, how does it get applied to just that area, not expanded outside of that area if it doesn't say that it's not commercial community design, it's community design? And when I was having a discussion on this, that community idea is, I live in Blanchard, it's a community area. And so how do these principles not get in, how do you interpret it? Because it's not for whether or not these three people, it's the consistency for the area. So how would that get applied to address that concern?
Right. So when
Well,
it says
you know,
commercial,
Are you asking me? You're asking me, what Swati read was code. That
Yeah.
wasn't a comprehensive plan, that was code.
Alan, if you want, I can answer this question, if that's okay with
Okay.
you.
Sure.
Okay. So when it says commercial developments or it says industrial developments, they are listed in our code specifically as to what sort of uses are commercial and what sort of uses are industrial.
Mhm.
It's very specific. So if somebody has a commercial zone property and they chose to put a single family dwelling unit on it, they are not required to follow these standards because it's not a commercial use.
Right.
It's a residential use, and it may be a commercially zoned property, but it's still a residential use, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these standards don't apply there.
Right. So when we're looking at community design, when do we use, how does that get used? Or is it just, if we're saying that it primarily is going to go for commercial
It's
use?
never going to be used directly because this is a comprehensive plan. This is the guiding document. We are never going to use the document to say, well, on a particular project and say, well, this is what the community design component says, and so you have a single family dwelling unit on this commercial property. We are going to make you do this, what the community design component says, right?
So we wouldn't use the component, you're just saying it has to be in the comp plan?
It has to be the ordinance. Ordinance is what gets applied to projects on a project by project basis. It's not the text of the comprehensive plan is a guidance as to how to translate that into ordinance to be applied to projects.
Okay.
Yeah.
There is no direct application to a particular project of
And I think that is what the question kind of, it's the fluid nature of it. But what I'm thinking you're saying is that the only real application for it would only exist with a commercial type property, not a residential type property when you were looking to the ordinance.
As of now, that is what our ordinance looks
Right.
like. That is how the text of the community design component
Right.
translates into our ordinance as of now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Onward to the fog. Anything else you need to hear on that one?
Not for me.
Okay, on that particular item, I would entertain a motion at this time. I guess so. Go ahead.
Thanks. And may I comment on both the community? Thank you for the opportunity to comment, Chairman and Commissioners. I'm wondering if,
Jennifer, can you tell us your name for the people out there?
my name is Jennifer Ekstrom and I work with the Idaho Conservation League. I'm wondering if I may comment, please, on community design component as well as special areas and hazard areas at this time.
Just do this one because those ones are another file.
Yeah, that's on a different file.
It's a different file.
Okay. So I want to start by saying how much I appreciate the intent behind this comprehensive plan update process, both the efforts by staff and by the Planning Commission and by the Board of County Commissioners. But unfortunately, it seems to me that these efforts are falling short of what is needed in order to serve our county as we grow. I really appreciate the conversation you all have been having since the beginning of this meeting. It's been very good. But what's apparent is that you've been getting information and staff does not have the authority to incorporate comments from agencies and other community members into the document. And anytime in my lots of experiences of writing documents, it's always very difficult to write documents by committee. And so I just want to reiterate a request that was put in by the Idaho Conservation League and the Lakes Commission and Project 7B back in July of 2022, asking that you hire a planning consultant, not someone who would have authority to dictate what the plan is, but somebody who would take pride in ownership, one person who would be compiling all of the information and offering a draft to the Planning Commission based on the community input. The Planning Commission is doing a heck of a great job in some situations, but it's a committee, and writing by committee is just a terrible process. In particular about this community design component, I think it's a case in point of the process falling short. This draft is a few paragraphs, as you can see. That is not adequate to be considered a section of a comprehensive plan. I just have an example here of a section of a comprehensive plan, the community design component, and it starts with an intent and purpose, then it describes the character of the county, and then it has design, theme, and style, and applicability, and a map, and site design, and building design, and signage, and all of these components that would be a little bit more elaborated on from what is in here. And I'm not suggesting that the county dictate to people what their private property rights are and are not. I'm not suggesting taking away private property rights, but creating a sense of direction for this county as we continue to get an influx of people moving in from a variety of other areas. I think that it behooves us to set the stage for how we want to see this county look in the future. So thanks for the opportunity to comment, and I'll look forward to providing additional comments when we get to the special areas and hazard areas section. But I just will conclude by saying that one of my greatest teachers in my life said a statement that has stuck with me my whole life, and it's that anything worth doing is worth doing well. And so I plead with you to find the resources to hire a consultant who will take pride in ownership of this huge project. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dave, how are you?
Good. How are you? George Garrick for the record. I would like to just support everything that Jennifer just said. Since she said it so well, I'm just going to restrict my comment to use of a microphone. Commissioner Bradshaw, I saw that when Jennifer began to speak, she was in her seat and you encouraged her to come to the microphone. I'm sure that's because you want this to be understood, possibly by the people that are viewing online. My question to you is, and I believe you have the authority, and Commissioner Williams, I'm glad to hear that the microphone situation was upgraded in this room. But it just seems to me that if there are going to be three of you and a speaker, I'm just wondering why you're not asking the speaker, your planning employee, to use a microphone, but you're asking us to do it. Yes, and it was brought to her. I believe this gentleman actually took it from the table and brought it to her. Why can't there be a microphone at the podium?
It's on order.
Thank you.
Thank you. Randy. Name for the record.
Yes, sir.
But they can't see who you are right now.
Randy Stoltz for the record. Firstly, sorry for my tardiness today, but when you've got an 80-year-old mom and she's not where you anticipate her being, sometimes you got to check on some things. So anyway, to continue. I rise generally in support of the idea of a community design component, and I think I tend to support the language that I've seen here, particularly as a beginning. I'd point out that out in the county, height restrictions as a matter of public safety would be appropriate, just from the standpoint of fire suppression, for example. You don't want to have buildings, much more massive than your firemen can get to the top of, I would tend to think. And moreover, just as a matter of preserving our rural character, I think it's appropriate to have some sort of intent and direction provided through a community design component. I grew up here, 55, 56 years I've lived here. And I drove around last summer and saw some things that I found pretty heartbreaking. There's a protected wetland out on the south side of the river that the area means a lot to me. And someone was blasting into the side of a cliff overlooking that wetland to make an access road. They were blasting into that mountainside home sites. And it sort of reminded me of the adage during the Vietnam War about we destroyed the town in order to save it. They're despoiling the view that they're moving there to appreciate. And it made no sense to me, and it was heartbreaking. There are places in this county that I bucked hay off of, as a kid. That, 20-acre hayfield that now has 25 houses, and they each have their own septic tank. And as high as our water table is in this county, that's liable to lead, that increased density is liable to lead to frankly, a poop show in pretty short order, if we don't have the ability to and in this particular case, yes, mandate developers form sewer districts as a condition of that development. Community design, again, speaks to that. I don't see anything in this particular generalized language that leads to some sort of Agenda 24 situation where, there's government overreach. I think it's appropriate as a growth management tool for a community to be able to say, no, this is not what we want our community to become. And I think this language allows us to have general standards and a general direction to be given. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Randy.
Ms. Molly?
Hello, Molly McCann, Sandpoint. I have similar comments that the language within here does not dictate all of these building standards that the actual intent of the component states. There's a couple things in there, like industrial landscaping and reduced lighting. But generally, the entire language is about the idea that we want rural character in Bonner County. That's the premise of the entire topic. So I believe that you have a reason to not include the component as a community design component under the comprehensive plan because it's we do want rural. We live rurally. We're not in this urban environment here as far as the county goes. And you can take this language and put it into another component that would be the land use component because it is confusing. When I read this, I didn't realize that it was going to be about rural design, rural character. I didn't really even know what the chapter was going to be about. But so that's my recommendation is that that you do decide that community design would not be appropriate for Bonner County because your goal is for rural, and that you include it in a land use component or a different component. And then I have a couple comments on this language. On the second paragraph, last sentence, and this is also mentioned in the rural or in the goals and objectives, but it says new development should occur in areas of similar densities and with compatible uses. And my concern is that we have rezoned a lot of our county over the last couple of years to smaller densities and changed uses. And so if you're this is basically permissive. You can permit develop where there are higher densities. And I believe that it would be very easy to go in and say there are 5-acre parcels in this area, and so it's appropriate for new development. When across the street there might be 20-acre parcel zoning, because our zoning is so fragmented right now. So I'm concerned about that language. And I'm also concerned that rural isn't really defined. This entire thing is talking about the need for rural character, but we haven't really defined what rural character is. We don't really state that in any way, shape, or form that I saw. So thank you.
Thank you. Alan, can I ask you a question? I think he might be muted.
Yeah, sure.
So Jennifer raised some questions about kind of a compare and contrast of what was in the community design versus other community designs. And I have a thought of why there's not a bigger section there, but do you want to give a response to her concern so we can see if we can address that question as to why there wasn't more information in that design?
Well, the way we've approached these components is that this is a high altitude, if you will, view of these various subjects that are in the components. And what we've said, for instance, in this one is in order to preserve the natural features and rural atmosphere of the community, so on and so forth, that certain things should be taken into consideration. When you get into actual building design standards, or whether that's something you should do or not, that's really code. That's really part of the ordinances that you guys would be dealing with. As I said before, all this is to do is to provide a framework to say, yeah, these things need to be considered. And then, when you get the actual either zoning or building standards, then you can deal with that. But that's not something you deal with in a comprehensive plan. So that's the way we approached it. I don't know if that answered your question, but hopefully it did.
No, that,
We didn't feel it was appropriate to put any sort of design standards or height restrictions or anything like that. I mean, this is not code. This is a comprehensive plan.
I understand that. I think for the group that reached out to me, it was that the language was, it was already in play in a different area in the bigger community that is building. And so that question about, is it leading to what other countries are doing with community design? But, so your question, it does answer, and is it accurate to say that the commission is identifying that the component is a standalone component requirement? Is that what I understood you to say?
Yes.
Okay.
If you don't address a component that's required under the state code, that could invalidate your entire comprehensive plan.
And so the request from Molly to slide the intent under a different section doesn't satisfy that?
Not in my opinion.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, did you have something? I just had those two to follow up on.
One of the things I did is I was looking at this component. I looked at the language of the component, and then I looked at the goal and objective. And it says, and I think this is important for us to consider, that here's the goal for this comprehensive plan as presented by the applicant, which in this case is the Planning Commission, is that Bonner County's goal is to maintain a variety of lifestyles and a rural character in the future development of Bonner County. And then it has 3 different objectives, excuse me. Bonner County intends for new development to locate in areas with similar densities and compatible uses, 1. Bonner County intends for new development to minimize the adverse impacts on adjacent areas, 2. And number 3, Bonner County intends to consider the protection of natural resources and the rural features and surrounding uses of the community in the design and location of new development. I think the goals and objectives are how we get there, and this is a good start, because designing our county, whether we like it or not, growth is going to continue. I don't see people stopping wanting to move here. So I don't know what's the next phase of this, Mr. Chairman.
We take a motion on it, whether we approve it or not. This particular amendment right here.
I did want to address one thing that has come up a couple times is about how we're going about the plan. And I think one of the things a different commissioner mentioned was they were going to complete the plan and then go back and look at the goals to make sure it met up and kind of basically write it and do a review of it. And then there was some discussion of what do we do to get a completed plan and then a review, because I want to make sure we recognize how hard the Planning Commission, they're working really hard on the plan, and we need to get something done. And I think it was the last time we had this meeting, they had the idea of going back on the goals, and I think that is it's hard to look at making decision when the goals are going to change when we're done. That's one of the things I have struggled with is I agree that it meets it now, but we were told they're going to go back and review it, and that had questions from community members of how are we approving components if we're going to change the goals potentially later. And I think I rest on the answer of we're doing the best we can without hiring that person, and if the community is going to want to look at that, I think we have to get a plan completed, because we've been doing this for 6 years and we would just be starting all over again. And I have to accept that it's not necessarily perfect, but they're doing a lot of work on this plan. And I think even they understand they're going to go back and take a look at what's happening. Because I think this is terribly difficult to do, so I just have a hard time, and I think I have a hard time with using the word because it is in play already in a different area. But that's my crappy 2 cents on it.
And just FYI, that expert consultant that we might consider hiring would be someone similar to our planning director or our planners. And we actually have one on the commission that had 30 years as a planner. So, yeah, we already have that consultant for free, so, and then we're paying 3 or 4 of them, so.
May I clarify?
Yes.
Thank you, Jennifer Ekstrom. So what I'm talking about, whether or not it's a new hired expert consultant, I recognize there's plenty of experts already on hand. But what I'm talking about is having one person that's assigned to take leadership of this whole process. And for example, you know, I don't think that any expert in charge of this process would have done what Asia just described, which was develop the goals, objectives, and policies before the whole comprehensive plan was updated, because those goals, objectives, and policies need to come out of these larger, more general comprehensive plan components. And so if there was just someone driving the process that had professional experience, that had some authority in the process, I think it would be beneficial. Thank you.
And I think that is what, one of the things we have to remember is this has been going on for 6 years and the Planning Commission has changed. And it's my understanding that that's what Alan is trying to do, is take kind of the helm of the plan and kind of filter that information up. And it's a hard one to do, because whenever you do things in groups, it makes it difficult. And then when you look at the community input and the various ancillary groups that exist that have meaningful input, it makes it even harder to get to a finished product. And I have to appreciate that, you know, he's here today on Zoom to help with that communication of what they did do on this. I think that's what this Planning Commission is trying to do, is to filter it through a person. But I do think that in a way they did recognize that the goals are going to shift on this plan once they're done writing it, because there's so many different components. And there's overlapping components, as we're going to see in the next one, when we're all going to talk about hazardous and why something isn't there, and in natural resources.
May I say something? George Garrick for the record. It may be the case that you have a planner with 30 years experience, but it sure doesn't look like it to me. That's number one. Number two, yes, I understand that when you ask for input, it complicates it. But one thing there's two things that have been extremely frustrating. You style these things as workshops and you don't really give the public an opportunity to actually contribute. And then when you do contribute, in the process of reviewing comments, there's no indication that the commissioners have actually taken into account public comment. And I just find that extremely odd that, you know, to the extent that you're allowing the public to contribute at all, there's no indication that that the public comments are being taken into account. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, at this time, we will close the public comment and we will look at the motion on page 5.
Mr. Chairman, I
You got a
move to.
number?
Oh,
Yes, 2023-14.
14. That would be the second one. Okay,
Matt?
you may.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the adoption of the community design component of the comprehensive plan, file AM 001722, as presented or as amended in this hearing, finding that it is in accord with the requirements of Idaho Code 676508 and the procedures of Idaho Code 676509. This action does not result in a taking of private property.
I second the motion.
Roll call vote?
Commissioner Ahmed?
Yes.
Commissioner Williams?
I'm going to abstain from voting because I want to do more research on that topic. So.
Commissioner Bradshaw?
Aye. Motion passes. Now the next motion.
Mr. Chairman, I further move to approve Resolution 2023-14, adopting the community design component of the comprehensive plan.
I second the motion.
Roll call vote?
Commissioner Ahmed?
Yes.
Commissioner Williams? Commissioner
Aye, yes. Motion passes. Next motion. Oh, we're not gonna amend it, we're just right there, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're right there.
That's the other in case motion. All right, that will take us to file number AM0018-22. And I will ask that any comments that we do, that they would be directed at the subject at hand, and we'll keep it at that and move along. Ms. Swati?
So the next file we have is the other components, hazardous areas and special areas or sites. This hearing today with the Board of County Commissioners is a continuation of the hearing from January 11. As seen previously, the file was noticed to several agencies. It was duly noticed in the newspapers, as well as noticed to political subdivisions. We received comments from Idaho Department of Fish and Game and several no comments from other agencies. There were also other agencies that did not reply. And then we did receive several public comments. We received an additional public comment yesterday, so you may not have a printed copy of it. I printed those out, but they are in your folders. They are in your folders in your laptop. So the hazardous areas component was first adopted in 2002. The special areas component was also adopted in 2002. None of them were modified later on. During this update, the Planning Commission held several workshops and hearings to get to the point where we are today. And it was recommended for approval by the Planning Commission on their December 6th hearing. I can bring up the sections that were proposed for adoption. So the hazardous areas is the first component that we can talk about. If the board has any questions that I can help answer.
Can you pull up on your, it might be faster, the definition of the hazardous areas? Slide it through this. Thank you. Can I ask Alan to maybe put you on the spot to give a response as to why planning decided to not include wetlands in the hazardous areas with looking at the Fish and Game response and their follow-up information to the county, they were not interpreting it as if they were over wetlands. They were trying to explain the issues and concerns that come from wetlands and the impact on natural resources. And so even when you read their letter, they're having concerns regarding one of the things that defines that area is like the surface ruptures and that impact. Why would wetlands not fit under that area for the sake of the protection of that area instead of just in natural resources what's the reason that it's better as a natural resource than hazardous when the ecosystem is also impacted if we develop in those areas? And I think it's also difficult for Bonner County because we have so many wetlands compared to other counties. And Fish and Game was trying to hit on that concept in their letter to us regarding wetlands and why they thought it did fit under hazardous areas.
Well, if I can address that, Commissioner Williams, we didn't consider that wetlands were a hazardous area in the same sense that landslides, mudslides, avalanche hazards are. So we thought it was a more appropriate place to put it in natural resources, which is that's what it is. It's a natural resource, and because it's a natural resource, it doesn't mean it needs to be. It shouldn't be protected. But I think also with wetlands, you need to consider, and we'll get to it when we get to natural resources. We haven't got to that component yet, but the county has limited jurisdiction over wetlands, so I think that played into our thought process as well. But certainly, with regard to hazardous areas, we just didn't think that it was is a hazardous area. It's not. It's a ecological piece of the county. So that's the reason we didn't put it in here. And as you see from the code definition of hazardous areas, that it's talking about known hazards, and that's wetlands is not a known hazard. It's a special area maybe, but it's not a known hazard.
And the wetlands will be addressed under natural resources when you get to that, right?
Yes.
Right, which is actually a better place for it. Not a lot of people get hurt in a wetlands where they would in a landslide, mudslide, avalanche, rock slide, etc. So even yeah, yeah. Time the EPA and everybody got through with them, yeah, they'd be dangerous. But yeah, it doesn't really fit in a hazardous area. It's a fragile area, but it's not hazardous.
And so,
hazardous as to the public.
And so then my follow-up would be, can you do the same compare and contrast for special areas, since those wetlands came up in both of those sections from the Fish and Game letter, to say why, if we cross off hazardous, why wetland wouldn't fit under special areas versus natural resources, because there's an argument greater for special areas, but we discussed it last time in both hazardous and special. And the reason that I feel a little bit leaning more towards it goes under special areas is because of the ecological wildlife aspect of it. And I believe that was the information that the Fish and Game was trying to present as the importance of wetlands. And I don't think there's not a idea that the county has control over it. It's that it is special, and therefore consideration needs to be given because of the natural ecological impact that exists there, and what is actually taken away when we, for example, put gravel over the wetland and build something. We do negatively impact the ecological value and the wildlife of that particular area, and then you could also argue the scenic significance of that area. So what's the argument for not putting it in special areas or sites?
Well, if you added it to special areas or sites, would you then take it out of natural resources? I mean, to me, it's a natural resource. And just like a lake is, or a river, or whatever, those are natural resources. And I think it's more appropriate to put it in there. I mean, I guess you could put it here too, but that would seem to be redundant. I don't think you need it in both places. In past, the comprehensive plan have discussed wetlands in the natural resources component, and that's where we expect to deal with it.
Commissioners, we also have another planning commissioner online, Matt Linscott, if you'd like to hear maybe from another commissioner.
Well, Mr. Linscott, can you hear us? Unmute yourself, Matty boy.
Matt, you should be good to speak.
He hates it that he's not here. He loves to talk.
Can you hear me now?
Oh,
We can hear you now.
jinxed myself.
I didn't know I hit my button to speak.
Oh, did,
You have nothing to say, Matt?
Well, I agree with what Alan has been saying. You know, it sometimes gets redundant if you have something in two different elements. One example was the meeting our original meeting that we had, or you guys had. It was commented that, well, kokanee are listed in this element, but not the bull trout, Mackinaw, and so forth. Well, that's because the bull trout, Mackinaw, West Slope cutthroat trout, they are all in the natural resource section. And it does create confusion when you do include different things in multiple components. And that's a prime example. Someone said, well, kokanee was mentioned here, but where's the bull trout? Well, they are located, if you look at our current natural resource component, there's a huge paragraph on those guys. So, I agree with everything that Alan has been saying. With regards to wetlands and such, with want to put in the resource section, as like he said, if you'd rather have it in the special sites, I suppose that can be done, but then I imagine that we would be taking it out of the natural resource component and then just leaving it there in the special sites. That's kind of your guys' direction to tell us where you want it, and then that can be worked on.
Thanks, Matt.
You betcha.
Open for comment.
George Garrick for the record. I would like to make the case that wetlands clearly belongs in special areas. I don't think that there can be any question about, especially the Coolins wetlands, for example, about the ecological importance of that wetland, but any wetlands in general. I think putting it in a natural resource diminishes its importance. And, I listened to one of the last conversations about wetlands, and there is so many new technologies and applications that can be used to delineate wetlands. And I think this whole conversation basically points out how one of the biggest deficiencies of this process is that you're not using up-to-date information. So clearly, I mean, if you're gonna consult anybody about where it should go, you should probably consult the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or the Idaho Fish and Game. They probably would be able to give you expert advice on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Molly, did you have something?
Molly McCann, Lakes Commission Executive Director, and I'm here speaking on behalf of the Lakes Commission Board, who hired me 7 years ago as their spokesperson. I want to talk about these specific components. I had many comments related to these chapters, but they were very difficult to address because there was a lot. I got very hung up on formatting, unified formatting between the two, content. I mean, the whole thing for me was difficult, and it was going to take a lot of time. So I decided to bank on the idea that you would decide today that there was enough input provided since the continuation of the hearing to take this back to the Planning Commission and have the opportunity for that input to be inserted into these particular components. So that's my hope for today, is that you do send this back to the commission, because I don't think you can make substantial changes today. So all that input, the very valuable input on the wetlands, on you name it, has been given to you. So would like that to go to use. I also want to touch on the jurisdictional issue that keeps coming up related to wetlands. The county doesn't have jurisdiction over a lot of areas in Bonner County. They don't have jurisdiction over Lake Pend Oreille, Priest Lake, or any waters of the United States within their boundaries. But you obviously want to protect those. We want to protect those. That's what drives our economy. They're extremely important natural resource. You can do that by implementing policy on the lands that are in your jurisdiction. Because as we know, flooding, pollution, fires, they don't stop at a particular jurisdictional border. So you do what you can on your land to protect those very valuable resources that are managed by somebody else. And the tools you have are this comp plan, and they are the code. That's what you have control over. So just really encourage you to move away from this whole jurisdictional thing. And then general comments on the comp plan process. When I read these chapters, I do not take comfort that they are guiding our plan for Bonner County for the next 5 to 10 years. I don't feel like they tell a story of Bonner County. I feel like it's very disjointed. And it's like Jennifer and everybody's pointed out, this is a really important process that should take time and be done right. I mean, first of all, we don't want to do it over. We don't want to do this whole thing and then realize that it really is not a plan. Like, what are we going to do? And I understand that the previous board wanted it to be short and concise. But if it's going to be short and concise, what is in there needs to be spot on. It needs to be taken from a comprehensive planning process that got whittled down into the most important things. And I feel like these are cut and pasted from an outdated plan. And that worries me. So I personally recommend that you stop this process of these specific components. You have someone, maybe it is someone within your department, but ideally someone with a lot of experience in comprehensive planning, to review what you've been doing so far. Is it adequate? Is it working? And then make a decision on how to go forward with the rest of it, because it's very time consuming to go through each of these for the public and these agencies that you're talking about today. So thank you for your time.
We know Jennifer's going to talk, so she's up.
Oh, no, there's one online. There was.
Okay, if it's my
You
turn
may.
again, Jennifer Ekstrom, the Idaho Conservation League, and thanks once again for the opportunity to comment. So I thank you, Molly, for your comments. I will reiterate my request that this process for these two particular components get sent back to the Planning Commission, tabled for today, because I'm very concerned that since you continued the file on whatever date that was, that none of the input that you've received has been incorporated into it. And like has been discussed, thank you for the conversation about the Idaho Fish and Game comments. I personally think that special areas absolutely need to include our special class 1 wetlands in Bonner County. There are 10 of them that have gone through a rigorous scientific process. They're unique, they're special, they're very rare. We're lucky in North Idaho that we have these special areas that do provide just critical habitat for numerous types of wildlife and plants. And so those should be considered a special area, absolutely. In the hazardous area component, there is there could be a much more clear indication about the changing weather patterns and fire risks that are increasing at greater frequency. That's not adequately addressed in the hazard areas section. Back to the special areas, the ecological significance of Lake Pend Oreille is, I'm sorry, there's 3 sentences, and I talked about it last time I addressed you, and it hasn't been changed. There's so much wonderful ecological value to Lake Pend Oreille and all the tributaries, and that needs to be in this plan, or it's just seriously falling short. Let's see. So I guess that's all for now. Thank you for considering tabling this again and sending it back to staff or to the Planning Commission for updates and revisions that I feel are critically necessary in order to allow this document to guide our county and our laws, our ordinances and codes in the future in the next 5 to 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else online?
I think Matt had his hand up a second ago.
Yeah, I think Matt may want to.
Sir Matt, still got your hand up.
Commissioners, may I add something?
Yes.
So during the process of this update, the Planning Commission reiterated this over and over again several times because that is what the state code says. That this comprehensive plan update is a land use update, land use comprehensive plan update. So there are many ideas which are really good, like the importance of Lake Pend Oreille, there is no doubt about it. But how does it translate into land use action? That's what the Planning Commission kept on getting back to over and over again.
Okay.
And that's why Commissioner Don Davis, he said that several times, that there are such good ideas here in these public comments, which could be overall county goals or objectives and policies, but they are not related to land use, unfortunately. And so there isn't a way to address them through our ordinance or through our land use practices.
One thing for me is on the wetlands, when I think of natural resources, I think of water, I think of what you're extracting. When I think of wetlands, I think of an area, I think of a site. And so I find it hard not to put wetlands in a special area, because when I say special area and I read what the goal of this area and site components are, it means that I have to give special attention to something related to that. And the impact on wetland is greater than the value that it has as a resource, because it can negatively or positively impact the ecosystem and the wildlife, which increases, in my opinion, the need to put it at a higher level of attention, not because we can control what happens, but we definitely have an impact on wetlands for how we build and what we're doing around these areas. And that's what I struggle with, is why wetlands aren't there when we see not just our state but across the country negative impacts to wetlands. So, and I could be wrong in my view of it, it feels like that we're trying to protect something about a wetland, which we're not extracting a benefit from the wetland, we are protecting what it offers naturally in the environment. And so that is not the same as a lake that has a natural resource of water that supplies water to a community. It is greater than that. It's a whole ecosystem on itself. And I think the hard part is that we just have so many in Bonner County, but I think that still requires us to put them in a special area. That's what I struggle with, not putting it there.
Well, wetlands is a special area, but it is, in fact, a natural resource. It's a resource of wildlife, it's a resource of filtration, but it is, in fact, a natural resource. And so it will fall under that category when they get to that category, and I think you'll be pleased with whatever they come up with. When it talks about special areas in this, historical sites, structures of historical or archaeological, architectural, ecological, wildlife, or scenic significance. A wetlands is much more than that. and you know as much as anybody, how diverse a wetland is. And so to call it just a little special area or a site would be not in the best interest of the wetlands. And so it should actually be in the natural resources where they're going to cover all that.
I think it should be in both places. I don't think there's anything wrong.
Well, let's see what it looks like when we get to natural resources. They already have an area for it, and this has been hacked out over and over and again. And
Matt's up now.
no,
Commissioner Williams hosted an excellent community workshop that was very well attended, and she received a ton of information on wetlands as they are respective to special areas. And I just think it's a disservice to to her efforts of setting up that meeting and all of the people who came if none of that information gets incorporated into these documents.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
yes.
It is my understanding from a multitude of conversations that we are building one document here. We are building a single comprehensive plan. And we're addressing each of these chapters that in totality make up our plan. And whether it is individually or in summation, incorporating wetlands into this plan will be done. And personally, from what I have seen and what I have heard, and in regards to jurisdictional authority, which is pretty important when we're looking at land use, I support waiting until we see how it is incorporated, because the goal of a comprehensive plan in regards to LUPA and Idaho Code is for land use regulation. And I support waiting until we see how our planning commission is going to provide that. And as I look at our goals and objectives and the work that has been done and the acknowledgement of our planning commission that they're not only considering the input provided, they are considering the multiple years that were done by the sub-area plans. Patience is not my watchword at all times, but I am willing to provide them that opportunity to see before I think we decide to fix something that we don't know if it's broken. So I am in support of moving forward.
Commissioners, I think Commissioner Matt would like to.
Hi, Uncle Matt. Speak to us.
All right, now can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, what I was going to say, there's been a lot of talk about hiring an independent consultant to go ahead and review or even perhaps restart this comprehensive plan process. However, our current comprehensive plan, that's exactly what we've done, is we've gone ahead and hired an independent consultant. That was JEB, who gone ahead and drafted this entire document. They were the ones who got ahead and placed wetlands into the natural resource component. There's no mention of it in our current comprehensive plan under special sites or hazardous areas. So we are kind of following suit with what was placed and where it was placed prior. So I completely believe that, the natural resources component is where it should be located in. I agree with what Commissioner Amat said regarding as long as it's in there in one of those elements, I think we're covered. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Sir Randall.
Randy Stoltz for the record, and this, color me thick, this is probably more of a question than a comment at this point. Maybe staff can answer it, maybe Alan can address it. But it seems to me that the basic issue here, hello? There's an echo. The problem here, or the situation being addressed maybe, is the limitations of FEMA mapping, because when it comes to flooding and floodplains and floodways and flooding, we're governed by FEMA mapping, which may not necessarily reflect actually often doesn't reflect the actual situation on the ground. But yet, perhaps the reason that wetlands aren't addressed here is because ever popular FEMA is, this is the FEMA section, and we'll get to wetlands again with natural resources, and I'll yield. Thank you.
George Garrett for the record. I would just like to make one last comment. I believe you all know that there's a Supreme Court case involving a property dispute in Bonner County, and it revolves around wetlands. So to the extent that a land use or the lack of any mention or emphasis on wetlands, in spite of the fact that there's a Supreme Court case pending, is just kind of odd to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners, there's a attendee online who would like to chance for public comment.
Light them up.
The other Jennifer.
Oh, wait. Did it work?
Can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Can.
Hi, this is Jennifer Wood for the record. First of all, thank you so much for allowing me to do Zoom today. I appreciate it. And Randy, I hope your mom's okay. I just have a simple question. And besides being redundant, what is the problem with having wetlands under two categories? I mean, there's places like Denton Slough with its petroglyphs that are going to fall under historical and natural resources and other things. What is the huge harm in having this in two different categories? And I'm honestly asking because I just would like to know if that could even be considered, if being redundant is the only problem. I just don't see why we couldn't do that. Thank you for your time.
I think one thing that I look at on this comp plan is there's a lot of data that we're using from years ago. And when I look at the current natural resources section, when it talks about wetlands, it actually does use Fish and Game's opinion in that particular section 1.3. So if we've received updated information and they're giving the suggestion to put it in a different area, that is updated from 1987. I just struggle with it. I understand the position, and maybe I think what I'm hearing is you guys just want to finish the comp plan and see where it lies and then revisit it in its entirety later. But we have updated data from 1985, and in our original plan, we used information from Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services, U.S. Department of Interior. We didn't just say Army Corps of Engineers is in charge of wetlands. And I think that it looks almost like we had a bigger view when we put it in natural resources. And is it possible that things around this topic have changed to warrant a greater visibility in special areas? Because one of the references we used in 87 was Fish and Game. So I'm a standalone person, I feel, so I guess we just move forward. I mean, I looked at this and there was a lot of community input, and I understand it has a habitat for animal and wildlife, but inherently on its own, it is an area. And I feel like I struggle with, are we using the most updated information? And I know some of it is we are limited with updated information. In this case, we've got a 2003 Fish and Game opinion, and we're not using that opinion. We're going to revert back to 1987. So I struggle with, maybe it's semantics, but I struggle with not using a reference that we have that updated it. So, okay. I think you guys are already ready.
And I think most of that'll get updated when they get to the wetlands. All that will come up. I'm sure these questions have come up in the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 12 meetings and workshops and hearings over this subject. I'm sure those questions have come up. And that is the reason that they will address it when they get to natural resources. And as Jennifer Woods spoke out, you'll have that piece of property that will fall in 2 categories. You'll have pieces of properties that'll fall in 3 or 4 categories, depending on the size of it and where its location is. But each one of those individual items that property falls into will be covered somewhere in the comp plan, whether it's ecological, whether it's wetlands, whether it's flood, whether it's all solid rock hillside. But there's a spot for everything. And if you go to putting something in 3 or 4 spots, then somebody wants to find out what the comp plan says about wetlands. They get to special areas and go, well, here it says right here, wetlands, and it doesn't say much, so we can do whatever we want to. So if you don't have that redundancy and you know that it's only listed in one place, then you go to that place and find out everything you want to find out about that. So the state counts it as a natural resource. Fish and Wildlife counts it as a natural resource. We have always counted it as a natural resource because it is a natural resource. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Yes. Being the crowd is so big, we're going to work in.
I'm sorry. I just want to say that I think there's many more changes that need to happen in the hazardous area and special area chapters other than wetlands. I mean, I maybe that's the only comments you got and the only input after all this time, but were there any comments about the fire section? I have comments about Albany Falls Dam. Not complete, not correct. I mean, I guess I just feel like there's so much that really does need to be changed in these chapters. The titles, all really important things that are missing still, not just wetlands. And I want to make that clear. If you approve this today, it is an incomplete, outdated document. That's my 2 cents.
Okay. All right. Commissioner Ahmed.
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the recommended update to the hazardous areas and special areas or sites components of the comprehensive plan file AM 0018-22 as presented or as amended in this hearing, finding that it is in accord with the requirements of Idaho Code 67-6508 and the procedures of Idaho Code 67-6509. This action does not result in the taking of private property.
I second the motion.
Roll call vote.
Commissioner Ahmed?
Yes.
Commissioner Williams?
I'm going to say no, but I want to give an explanation of my decision on this.
Okay.
We valued the input of Fish and Game in 1987, and their letter actually does clearly request that Bonner County highlight the ecological significance of wetlands in this particular section. And I understand the opinion of people, but the only resource presented was Fish and Game, and I think since it's not that big of a deal, I don't see why we wouldn't follow a recommendation from an agency that we prior used to justify natural resource to put it as a more ecologically significant parcel. So I'm going to dissent and vote no for that reason because I think it deserves more attention as per the recommendation of Idaho Department of Fish and Game.
Roll call vote.
Commissioner Bradshaw?
Yes. Motion passes. Motion resolution 2023-15.
Mr. Chairman, I further move to approve Resolution 2023-15 adopting the recommended updates to the hazardous areas and the special areas or sites components of the comprehensive plan and repealing the previously adopted hazardous areas and special areas or sites components in the comprehensive plan.
Roll call vote.
Roll call vote.
Is there a second?
Oh,
We need a
second.
second first.
Yep.
So we got a second?
Yeah.
Okay.
Second, okay.
Roll call vote.
Commissioner Ahmed?
Yes.
Commissioner Williams?
No for the previously stated reasons.
Commissioner Bradshaw?
Yes. Motion passes. And that concludes our planning hearing. It is 3:11 on a nice, windy, really cold afternoon.
their mailing? I mean, it's an admin. Yes? Staff's here.
I don't think we have enough information to identify all of the agencies that you would want to add. So maybe that's a discussion at a meeting
Well, I
of,
can think of a couple. Just even,
If I may, if we start talking about commissions or agencies, where does that end?
this,
well, I'm just referencing for the comprehensive plan.
if you saw what I said, you better talk to the one you don't side.
I think we go as big as we can. That's my opinion. I mean, if we're seeking legislative input, we seek as much input as possible. If we're seeking land use files, we stick with taxing districts and state ordinance. Legislative, as many as possible. But, get as many opinions as possible for our legislative function.
Long-
Stick to the absolute law for the quasi judicial function.
As long as it's applicable to the subject at hand. I mean, you wouldn't notice,
Is this hearing over?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
Okay, can we?
Yes, Swati.
Okay.
Oh,
Are these ready to be signed, Travis?
Does the
I'll
chair
tell him, go ahead and
consider
sign
the
on
meeting
it.
adjourned?
Oh, we don't even have a gavel.
Recording stopped.
We're adjourned.
Yeah.
I got a little coffee cup and a sign.
Swati's got some. You have some great stuff?
17
What kind of
was,
stuff?
was 14, right? The first one?
It was 2023-14.
Yeah, the first one, yeah. 14.